The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of Kepler 442b. As Marine Sergeant Jake Morrison checked his rifle one more time, the weapon felt solid in his hands, a familiar weight that had kept him alive through 3 years of frontier duty around him. The rest of his patrol squad made their final preparations for another routine sweep of the outer perimeter. "Morrison, you getting any signals on that cum unit?" Corporal Lisa Grant asked, adjusting the straps on her pack. She was 24, tough as nails, and had been Morrison's right hand for 8 months. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. "Nothing but static," Morrison replied, tapping the side of his communication device. "Command said the solar storms might interfere with transmissions today." Private First Class Tony Martinez laughed from where he knelt, tying his bootlaces. "When don't we have solar storms on this rock?" The stocky Marine from Texas had a way of finding humor in the worst situations. His dark eyes crinkled with amusement as he stood up and shouldered his heavy machine gun. Private Amy Rogers. The youngest member of their squad at 19 nervously checked her ammunition pouches for the 3rd time. Her red hair stuck out from under her helmet, and freckles dotted her pale face. "Sergeant, do you really think those alien ships are still out there?" Morrison studied the horizon through his binoculars. New Haven Colony sat in a valley about 2 miles behind them, its metal buildings glinting in the alien sunlight. Beyond, the settlement, strange purple trees stretched toward mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. "Intelligence says the Zephyrians are testing our defenses," Morrison said. "Could be scout ships, could be something bigger. That's why we're out here." The 4 Marines had been patrolling the colony's outer defenses for 3 weeks since the first alien contact. The Zephyrians had appeared suddenly, their ships dropping out of hyperspace near the edge of the system. Initial communications had been brief and threatening. The aliens claimed this sector of space belonged to their empire, and humans were trespassers who would be removed. Morrison had studied the intelligence. Reports about their enemy. The Zephyrians stood 8 feet tall, with thick scales covering their bodies and powerful claws that could tear through metal. They had yellow eyes like a snake and moved with surprising speed despite their size. Their technology was advanced, but they seemed to prefer close combat over long-range weapons. "Move out," Morrison ordered. "Same formation as yesterday. Grant, take point Martinez, watch our 6. Rogers, stay close to me." The patrol moved through the alien landscape with practiced efficiency. Their boots crunched on the strange crystalline sand that covered much of the planet's surface. Overhead, 2 small moons hung in the pale blue sky, and the air smelled of ozone and something metallic that made their noses wrinkle. They had been walking for an hour when Grant raised her fist, signaling the squad to stop. Morrison crept forward to where she crouched behind a cluster of rocks. "Movement," she whispered, pointing toward a ridge about 300 yards away. "Something big." Morrison raised his binoculars and swept the area. At first he saw nothing but rocks and the twisted alien plants that grew in patches across the landscape. Then something shifted in the shadows between 2 large boulders. "There," he breathed, focusing on the spot. A section of what he had thought was rock moved slightly, revealing the unmistakable outline of a Zephyrian warrior. The alien was crouched low, watching them through some kind of optical device. "How many?" Grant asked. Morrison continued scanning. His blood ran cold as he spotted more movement. "Too many," he said quietly. "I count at least 8, maybe more." The Zephyrians had positioned themselves in a semicircle around the human patrol route. It was a perfect ambush, with the aliens holding the high ground and multiple firing positions. Morrison realized they had been walking into a trap. "Rogers, try to raise the colony on the radio," Morrison ordered. "Tell them we have contact with hostile forces." Amy fumbled with her communication equipment, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm getting nothing, Sergeant. Just static." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien wind. The Zephyrians must have been jamming their communications. This was not a chance encounter. It was a planned attack. "Martinez, can you see any way out of this?" Morrison asked. The big Marine studied their surroundings with the eye of a veteran. Fighter, not good, Sarge. They've got us in a killing field. Best bet is to fall back toward that dry creek bed about 50 yards behind us. Before Morrison could respond, the Zephyrians attacked. The first sign was a strange howling sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. It was the battle cry of the alien warriors, a sound that made the human skin crawl. Then the ridge exploded with movement as 12 Zephyrian warriors rose from their hiding places. They were even more terrifying in person than in the intelligence. Photos, their scales were dark green and brown, perfect camouflage for the rocky terrain. Each warrior carried a weapon that looked like a cross between a spear and a rifle. Contact, Morrison shouted, raising his weapon. Fall back to the creek bed. The Zephyrians opened fire with their strange weapons. Bolts of blue energy sizzled through the air, and the rocks around the humans began to explode in showers of sparks and debris. Morrison felt the heat of one blast as it passed inches from his head. Grant returned fire while moving backward, her rifle barking steadily. Ow! One of her shots caught a Zephyrian in the shoulder, spinning the alien around, but it quickly recovered and kept advancing. These things are tough. She yelled over the sound of battle. Martinez had set up his machine gun behind a boulder and was laying down, covering fire. His heavy weapon made a distinctive hammering sound as it sent streams of bullets toward the advancing aliens. 2 Zephyrians stumbled and fell, but the others kept coming. They're flanking us. Rogers screamed, pointing to the left where 3 aliens were working their way around the human position. Morrison saw their situation was hopeless. The Zephyrians were too many, too well positioned, and too tough. But Marines did not give up without a fight. He grabbed a grenade from his belt and threw it toward the largest group of aliens. The explosion sent rocks and dust flying. But when the smoke cleared, the Zephyrians were still advancing. Their leader, a massive warrior with silver markings, on his scales pointed toward the humans and roared something in their alien language. "Amy, stay close," Morrison shouted as they fell back toward the creek bed. But as they moved, one of the flanking Zephyrians got a clear shot at the young Marine. The blue energy bolt caught Rogers in the chest, and she collapsed with a cry of pain. Grant immediately moved to help her, but another shot struck the corporal in the head. She fell without a sound. "Lisa," Morrison screamed, but he could see she was beyond help. Martinez was still firing his machine gun, but the aliens were getting closer. Morrison saw the big Marine take a hit in the leg, then another in the arm. Martinez kept firing until a Zephyrian warrior reached his position and struck him down with a massive clawed hand. Morrison found himself alone, wounded and surrounded. The Zephyrian leader approached slowly, his yellow eyes filled with what looked like amusement. The alien said something in his own language, and the other warriors laughed. Morrison understood. They were not going to kill him quickly. They wanted to hunt him. As the aliens spread out to surround him, Morrison made a desperate decision. He threw his last grenade toward the largest group of Zephyrians and used the explosion as cover to run toward the forest. Behind him, he could hear the aliens howling with excitement. The hunt had begun. Morrison crashed through the alien forest, branches tearing at his uniform and face. Behind him, he could hear the Zephyrians howling with excitement as they began their pursuit. His left shoulder burned where shrapnel had cut through his armor, and blood ran down his arm. The trees in this part of Kepler 440b grew close together, purple bark smooth and their leaves a strange silver color that rustled like metal in the wind. Morrison used the dense growth to his advantage, weaving between the trunks and trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and his hunters. After running for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Morrison stopped behind a massive tree trunk to catch his breath. His lungs burned in the thin alien air, and his heart hammered against his ribs. He checked his equipment quickly. His rifle had 3 magazines left. His sidearm was intact with 2 full clips. He had 1 combat knife, a medical kit, and some basic survival gear. Morrison pulled out his damaged radio and tried once more to contact New Haven Colony. The Zephyrians were still jamming communications, or the equipment was too badly damaged to work. Either way, he was on his own. In the distance, He could hear the aliens moving through the forest. They were not trying to be quiet. Their heavy footsteps crashed through the undergrowth, and they called to each other in their harsh language. Morrison realized they were not in any hurry. They were enjoying this. Back at the ambush site, War Leader HFY stood over the bodies. Of the dead Marines, the massive Zephyrian leader was 9 feet tall, with dark green scales that had silver markings showing his rank. His yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he examined the human weapons. "Weak," he said in the common galactic language, though none of his warriors understood him. "These humans fight with fear." HFY had been hunting for 30 years. He had tracked the fierce ice bears of his home world and the deadly shadow cats of the rim worlds. But hunting intelligent prey was different. It was more satisfying. The fear in their eyes, the desperate attempts to escape, the final moment. When they realized death was coming, these things made the hunt worthwhile. The other Zephyrians gathered around their leader. There were 11 of them now, all experienced warriors who had volunteered for this hunt. They had stripped off most of their armor and heavy weapons, keeping only their traditional hunting spears and energy pistols. This was to be a proper hunt, not a military operation. As the human runs toward the deep forest, reported Subleader Vexstar, a young warrior eager to prove himself. He is wounded and alone. We could catch him within the hour. HFY shook his massive head. "Oh, where? Is the sport in that? We'll track him slowly, let him think he has a chance." Fear makes the prey more interesting. The war leader pointed to 3 of his warriors. "You 3 will follow his trail, but stay back. Do not let him see you. The rest of us will spread out and move parallel to his path. We will drive him deeper, into the forest, away from his colony." An older warrior named Gorthak spoke up. "War leader, should we not finish this quickly? The human military might send search parties." HFY laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Their fleet is busy fighting our ships in orbit. No one is coming to save this one small human. Besides, our intelligence shows their ground forces are weak. They rely too much on their machines and not enough on their natural fighting skills." Zephyrians had been studying humans for months before launching their invasion. Their spies had observed human military training and tactics. The aliens were convinced that humans were soft, dependent on technology, and would break easily under pressure. A species that had only recently discovered space travel could not possibly match warriors, had been conquering worlds for 1,000 years. Remember, HFY continued. "We take only what we need to track him. No heavy weapons, no armor. This is a test of our hunting skills against his survival instincts. The kill must be earned properly." The warriors nodded their understanding. In Zephyrian culture, the manner of the kill was as important as the kill itself. A true hunter proved his worth by overcoming his prey through skill and courage. It's not superior firepower. Miles ahead in the forest, Morrison had found a small stream running between moss-covered rocks. He knelt beside the water and carefully cleaned. The wound on his shoulder? The cut was deep, but not life-threatening. He used supplies from his medical kit to bandage it properly. As he worked, Morrison's mind raced through his options. The forest stretched for hundreds of miles in all directions. He could try to circle back toward the colony, but the aliens would expect that. He could head deeper into the wilderness and try to find a place to hide, but that would only delay the inevitable. Morrison had been trained in survival and evasion tactics, but those techniques were designed for hiding from human enemies. He had no idea how well Zephyrian senses worked, or what tracking methods they used. For all he knew, they could smell him from miles away or see his heat signature through the trees. The Marine took a long drink from the stream and refilled his water bottles. The alien water tasted metallic, but was safe to drink, according to the colony's surveys. As he capped the bottles, Morrison heard something that made his blood run cold. Voices. Alien voices. Speaking in the Zephyrian language, they were still. Distant, but getting closer. Morrison moved away from the stream as quietly as possible. He found a thick cluster of the silver-leafed trees and crouched inside, trying to control his breathing. Through the gaps in the foliage, he could see movement on the other side of the water. 3 Zephyrian warriors emerged from the forest. They moved with the easy confidence of experienced hunters, their heads turning back and forth as they searched for signs of their prey. One of them knelt beside the stream and examined the muddy bank where Morrison had been drinking. The alien said something to his companions and pointed in Morrison's direction. The Marine's heart sank as he realized they had found his tracks. These creatures were better hunters than he had hoped, but instead of crossing the stream immediately, the Zephyrians seemed to be in no hurry. One of them sat down on a fallen log and pulled out what looked like a piece of dried meat. They were taking a break, as if they had all the time in the world. Morrison watched them for several minutes, studying their equipment and behavior. The aliens carried long spears with metal points and some kind of energy weapon on their belts. Their scales provided natural armor, and their claws looked sharp enough to tear through human flesh easily. But they moved like creatures who were overconfident, not worried about any threat from their prey. An idea began to form in Morrison's mind. These aliens thought they were hunting a helpless human who would panic and make mistakes. They expected him to run blindly through the forest until exhaustion or fear brought him down. They were treating this like a game. Morrison had spent 3 years fighting pirates and raiders along the frontier. He had learned that the most dangerous mistake an enemy could make was underestimating him. If the Zephyrians wanted to play games, he would give them a game they would never forget. The Marine carefully backed away from his hiding spot, making sure not to disturb any branches or leaves. He had to put more distance between himself and the hunters before he could start planning his counterattack. But for the first time since the ambush, Morrison felt a spark of hope. The aliens thought they were hunting prey. They were about to discover they had chosen the wrong human to hunt. Morrison moved deeper into the forest, his mind already working on ways to turn the tables on his pursuers. The hunt was just beginning, but the rules were about to change. Morrison had been moving through the alien forest for 6 hours when he found the perfect spot for his first trap. A narrow path wound between 2 large rock formations, creating a natural bottleneck that any pursuer would have to pass through. The Marine knelt beside the trail and began to work, using his combat knife. Morrison cut several thin branches from the silver-leafed trees. The wood was surprisingly strong and flexible. He wove the branches together to create a tripwire, positioning it just above ankle height, where the shadows would hide it from view. Next, Morrison gathered rocks from the stream he had passed an hour earlier. Each stone was about the size of his fist, heavy enough to do serious damage. He climbed up the rock formation on the left side of the path and carefully balanced the rocks in a precarious pile. A single branch held them in place, connected to his tripwire by a length of cord from his survival kit. The trap was simple, but effective. When someone walked through the narrow passage and caught the tripwire, the branch would snap and send 30 pounds of rocks crashing down on them. Morrison tested the mechanism twice to make sure it would work, then retreated to a hiding spot 50 yards away, where he could watch the path. He did not have to wait long. Within an hour, he heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching through the forest. Morrison pressed himself against the trunk of a large tree and peered around the edge. 3 Zephyrian warriors were following his trail, moving in single file. Through the dense undergrowth, the alien in front was young, probably inexperienced. His scales were bright green without the darker markings that came with age. He carried his spear carelessly and kept looking around instead of watching the ground for signs of danger. Behind him walked 2 older warriors who seemed more alert, but they were letting the youngster take point. Morrison held his breath as the lead Zephyrian approached the narrow passage. The alien paused at the entrance, his serpent-like head turning from side to side as he scanned for threats. For a moment, Morrison thought the trap had been discovered. Then the young warrior stepped forward into the passage. The tripwire caught him just above his scaled ankle. There was a sharp crack as the supporting branch snapped, followed by the rumble of falling rocks. The young Zephyrian looked up just in time to see 30 pounds of stone crashing down toward his head. The impact was tremendous. Rocks bounced off the alien's skull and shoulders, driving him to his knees. Green blood ran down his face, and he made a sound like a wounded animal. The other 2 warriors rushed forward to help him. But Morrison could see from his hiding place that the youngster was badly hurt. One of the older Warriors examined the tripwire while the other tended to their injured companion. Morrison heard them talking in their harsh language, and their voices sounded angry. They had realized this was not an accident. Their prey was fighting back. Morrison waited until the Zephyrians moved on, carrying their wounded comrade, before he emerged from his hiding spot. His first trap had worked better than expected. The aliens were now down to 10 warriors, and they would be more cautious. But they would also be angry, and angry enemies made mistakes. The Marine followed the Zephyrians at a safe distance, staying well back from their trail. He wanted to learn more about their habits and weaknesses before he struck again. After watching them for 2 hours, Morrison began to understand their hunting patterns. The aliens moved in groups of 3 or 4, staying close enough to support each other, but spread out enough to cover more ground. They communicated with hand signals and brief words, trying to stay quiet, but not succeeding very well. Their heavy bodies crashed through the undergrowth like bulldozers, leaving a trail that even a child could follow. More importantly, Morrison noticed that they had trouble seeing in the growing darkness. As the alien sun began to set behind the mountains, the Zephyrians moved more slowly and made more noise. They kept bumping into branches and stumbling over roots that they should have seen easily. Morrison smiled grimly. Humans had evolved as hunters on a world with changing light conditions. His eyes adapted quickly to the dim forest, and he could move almost silently through terrain that was causing his enemies problems. The night was going to be his advantage. As full darkness fell, Morrison prepared his second trap he had found. Another narrow passage, this one between 2 fallen trees that created a natural tunnel. Working by feel in the darkness, Morrison strung a length of wire between the tree trunks at chest height. The wire was nearly invisible even in daylight, and would be impossible to see at night. But this trap was not meant to kill. Morrison attached several empty ammunition cans to the wire, along with loose rocks that would rattle when disturbed. When someone walked into the wire, the noise would alert every Zephyrian in the area to the location. Then Morrison would be waiting with his rifle. The Marine found a good firing position on a small hill overlooking the passage. He had a clear view of the approach routes and multiple escape paths if things went wrong. Morrison checked his weapon one more time and settled in to wait. An hour after midnight, for Zephyrians approached the fallen trees. Morrison could barely see them in the darkness, but he could hear their heavy breathing and the scrape of their scales against bark as they squeezed through tight spaces. They were moving very slowly now, clearly having trouble navigating in the dark. The lead warrior walked straight into Morrison's wire trap. There was a tremendous crash of metal and stone. As the ammunition cans fell and the rocks scattered across the ground, the Zephyrian roared in surprise and anger, while his companions spun around looking for the source of the attack. Morrison opened fire from his hilltop position. His rifle was equipped with a night scope that turned the darkness into green-tinted. Daylight, he could see the aliens clearly while remaining invisible to them. His first shot caught the lead warrior in the chest, spinning him around. His second shot dropped another Zephyrian before the aliens even knew where the attack was coming from. The 2 surviving warriors tried to return fire, but they were shooting blind. Their energy weapons lit up the forest with blue flashes, but the bolts went wide, striking trees and rocks instead of their hidden enemy. Morrison methodically picked them off with carefully aimed shots, using his superior night vision to devastating effect. When the shooting stopped, 4 Zephyrian warriors lay dead in the narrow passage. Morrison waited another 10 minutes to make sure no other aliens were approaching, then descended from his position to examine the bodies. The dead Zephyrians were equipped with energy weapons, hunting spears, and communication devices. Morrison took one of the alien pistols and several power cells. The weapon felt strange in his human hands, designed for larger fingers and different grip strength. But it worked when he tested it on a nearby tree. More importantly, Morrison activated one of the communication devices and listened to the alien chatter. He could not understand the language, but he could hear the fear and confusion in their voices. The hunting party was talking rapidly, asking questions, reporting positions. Their confident hunt was turning into a nightmare. Morrison smiled as he began preparing his next trap. The Zephyrians had wanted to hunt a human. Now they were learning what it meant to be hunted by one. The Marine had spent his entire military career studying how to kill enemies who were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than he was. These aliens were about to get a lesson in human warfare. The hunt was no longer going according to the Zephyrian plan. Morrison was writing his own rules now, and those rules were written in alien blood. War leader HFY stood in the center of what remained of his hunting party, his yellow eyes burning with rage and confusion. 7 of his warriors were dead, killed by traps and ambushes that showed a level of cunning he had not expected from human prey. The remaining 4 warriors looked nervous, constantly glancing at the shadows between the trees. "This is not possible," HFY growled in his native language. "Humans are weak. Our intelligence reports confirmed this." Sub-leader Vexstar, the young warrior who had been eager to prove himself, now seemed much less confident. "War leader, perhaps we should call for reinforcements. This human fights like a demon." HFY struck Vexstar across the face with the back of his clawed hand. The younger alien stumbled backward, green blood running from his split lip. "We do not retreat from one small human. We are Zephyrian warriors, conquerors of 100 worlds." But even as he spoke the words, HFY felt doubt creeping into his mind. This hunt was supposed to be simple entertainment, a way to demonstrate human weakness to his war council. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare that was costing him his most experienced fighters. The war leader looked at his remaining warriors. Besides Vexstar, there was Gorthak, an old veteran with scars covering his dark scales. Next to him stood Shendel, barely out of his warrior training but deadly with a spear. The 4th survivor was Vector, Vexstar's brother, who carried the hunting party's only long-range weapon. "The human cannot fight all of us at once," HFY said, trying to convince himself as much as his warriors. "We will change our tactics. No more small groups. We stay together and hunt as one pack." Miles away, Morrison crouched beside a stream, cleaning the alien blood from his combat knife. He had just finished setting up his most elaborate trap yet, and his hands were steady despite the exhaustion that pulled at his bones. 3 days of constant hunting and being hunted had pushed him to his limits. But his mind remained sharp and focused. The Marine had been studying his enemies carefully. The Zephyrians were strong and tough, but they relied too much on their physical advantages. They expected to overpower their prey through brute force, not outsmart them through tactics and planning. That arrogance was going to get them all killed. Morrison had noticed that the aliens were starting to stay together in larger groups. It made them harder to pick off individually, but it also made them easier to track. 5 large warriors crashing through the forest made enough noise to wake the dead. The Marine checked his equipment one more time. His rifle had 1 magazine left. His pistol was down to its last clip. He had taken an alien energy weapon from one of his victims, but it only had enough power for a few more shots. His grenade supply was exhausted. His medical kit was nearly empty from treating various cuts and wounds. But Morrison had other resources now. He had learned to use the alien forest to his advantage, turning every rock and tree into a potential weapon. More importantly, he had gotten inside the heads of his enemies. He could hear the fear in their voices when they talked on their communication devices. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and they knew it. Morrison's latest trap was his most ambitious yet. He had spent hours preparing it, using everything he had learned about Zephyrian behavior and psychology. The trap was designed not just to kill, but to break the spirit of any survivors. The Marine had found a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. In the center of the clearing, he had placed the body of one of the dead Zephyrians, positioning it to look like the warrior had been tortured before being killed. Around the body, Morrison had arranged rocks and patterns that looked like some kind of ritual marking, hidden in the trees around the clearing. Morrison had set up a series of connected traps. Tripwires led to falling logs, deadfall traps, and even a pit filled with sharpened stakes. But the real trap was psychological. Morrison was counting on the aliens' curiosity and anger to draw them into the clearing, where they would be most vulnerable. The Marine climbed high into a tree at the edge of the clearing and settled in to wait. He had a clear view of all the approaches and a good escape route if things went wrong. His rifle was loaded with his last magazine. Every shot would have to count, as the sun reached its highest point in the alien sky. Morrison heard the sound he had been waiting for. Heavy footsteps were approaching through the forest, accompanied by the harsh voices of the Zephyrians. They had found his trail and were following it toward the clearing. The 5 remaining aliens emerged from the trees in a tight group. There, weapons ready. HFY was in the lead, his massive frame tense with barely controlled rage. Behind him, the other warriors spread out slightly, but stayed close enough to support each other. When they saw the body in the center of the clearing, the Zephyrians stopped, abruptly. Morrison could hear them talking in excited, angry voices. The war leader stepped forward to examine the corpse and the strange markings around it.
That's for me.
HFY roared in the common galactic language, apparently too angry to remember that humans might not understand his native tongue. The human mocks our death rituals, Morrison had guessed correctly. The rock patterns he had created accidentally resembled some kind of religious symbol to the aliens. Their fury was making them careless, exactly as he had hoped. Vexstar started forward to get a closer look at the body, but his foot caught Morrison's first tripwire. A massive log, held in place by carefully balanced rocks, came swinging down from the trees like a giant club. The young warrior tried to dodge. The log caught him in the chest and sent him flying across the clearing. The other Zephyrians spun around, looking for the source of the attack. But Morrison had already moved to his next position. He opened fire from a different tree, his rifle cracking steadily as he put carefully aimed shots into the confused aliens below. DORTHK. The old veteran took a bullet in the shoulder, but managed to return fire with his energy weapon. Duh! The blue bolt passed close enough to Morrison's head that he could smell the ozone. Ow. But the Marine had already moved again. Shendel tried to charge toward Morrison's muzzle flashes, but he stepped into another trap. The ground gave way beneath his feet, and he fell into the stake-filled pit with a scream that echoed through the forest. His cries were cut short by the sound of metal points finding their target. Morrison continued to move and fire, using his knowledge of the trap locations to stay ahead of the surviving aliens. Vector tried to flank him, but walked into a snare that jerked him off his feet and left him hanging upside down from a tree branch. Morrison put a single shot through the helpless warrior's head. Within minutes, only HFY and the wounded Gorthok remained alive. The old veteran was bleeding heavily from his shoulder wound, and the war leader's eyes showed something Morrison had not seen before in a Zephyrian face. Fear. Impossible, HFY whispered, staring at the bodies of his warriors scattered. Around the clearing, one human cannot do this. Morrison dropped from his tree and landed silently behind the 2 surviving aliens. His rifle was empty, but he had drawn his combat knife and the captured energy weapon. The blade gleamed in the alien sunlight, and his eyes were cold as winter. Wanted to hunt a human, Morrison said quietly. Congratulations, found one. HFY spun around to face Morrison, his massive claws extending from his hands like metal knives. The war leader's yellow eyes burned with a mixture of rage and something else, respect. In 3 days, this single human had destroyed an entire hunting party of experienced Defarian warriors. You fight well for prey, HFY said in the common galactic language, his voice a low growl. But the hunt ends now. Morrison kept his distance, the captured energy weapon steady in his hands. Beside HFY, old Gorthak swayed on his feet. Green blood running down his arm from the bullet wound. The veteran warrior was tough, but he was losing strength fast. Your friends thought the same thing, Morrison replied, gesturing toward the bodies scattered around the clearing. They were wrong too. HFY looked at the dead warriors, and Morrison could see the pain in the alien's expression. These had not just been soldiers under his command. It had been his pack, his hunting brothers. The war leader's grief was quickly replaced by cold fury. You used tricks and traps like a coward, HFY snarled. Face me in honest combat if you dare. Morrison almost laughed. Honest combat? You ambushed 4 Marines with 12 warriors? You hunted me like an animal for sport. Don't talk to me about honor. The Marine knew he was running out of time. His captured energy weapon had maybe 3 shots left, and then he would be down to his combat knife against 2 aliens who were each twice his size. But Morrison had one advantage left. The Zephyrians still did not understand what they were. "Really fighting? You want to know the truth?" Morrison said, backing toward the edge of the clearing. "Your intelligence reports were wrong. Humans are not weak. We are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and you just proved it." HFY roared and charged forward, moving faster than Morrison had expected. The Marine fired his energy weapon. But the war leader twisted aside and the blue bolt missed by inches. Morrison rolled to his left as massive claws slashed through the air. Where his head had been, Gorthak tried to circle around behind Morrison, but the old warrior stumbled and fell to one knee. His wound was worse than Morrison had thought. Left only HFY. But the war leader was the most dangerous opponent Morrison had faced yet. The Zephyrian came at him again, using his long reach to keep Morrison at a distance, while slashing with his claws. Morrison ducked and weaved, trying to get close enough to use his knife. But the alien was too experienced a fighter to let that happen. Morrison fired his energy weapon again, aiming for HFY's center of mass. This time the shot connected. Burning through the alien's thick scales and into the muscle beneath, HFY staggered but did not fall. Instead, he became even more aggressive. Ignoring the pain and pressing his attack, the war leader's claws caught Morrison's arm, tearing through his uniform, an opening for parallel cuts in his flesh. The Marine bit back a cry of pain and tried to counterattack, but HFY was ready for him. A backhand blow sent Morrison flying across the clearing to land hard against a tree trunk. Morrison's vision blurred for a moment, and he tasted blood in his mouth. The energy weapon had been knocked from his hands and lay several feet away, too far to reach. HFY approached slowly, savoring his apparent victory. "Now you die as prey should die," the war leader said, raising his claws for the killing. Blow! Morrison pulled his combat knife and lunged forward in one desperate move. HFY was expecting him to retreat or try to reach the energy weapon. He was not ready for a direct assault from an opponent who should have been finished. The knife blade found the gap in HFY's scales just below his ribs, sliding deep into the alien's body. The war leader roared in pain and surprise, but his claws came down in a reflexive strike that opened Morrison's back from shoulder to hip. Both fighters staggered apart, bleeding heavily. Morrison could feel warm blood running down his back and soaking into his torn uniform. HFY had one hand pressed against his side where green blood leaked between his fingers. "Impossible," HFY whispered, staring at the human who refused to die. "How can you still fight?" Morrison wiped blood from his mouth and smiled grimly. "Because I am a United Earth Marine, we do not quit, we do not surrender, and we do not lose to alien scum who think humans are weak." The two warriors circled each other slowly, each looking for an opening. Morrison's knife was slick with alien blood, while HFY's claws dripped with human blood. They were both badly wounded, but neither was ready to give up. Behind them, Gorthak had managed to reach his feet. The old warrior raised his energy weapon with shaking hands and tried to aim at Morrison. His vision was blurred from blood loss, and his hands trembled with exhaustion. Morrison saw the movement and threw himself to the side just as Gorthak fired. The energy bolt went wide, but it struck a tree branch that crashed down between Morrison and HFY. The distraction gave Morrison the opening he needed. The Marine dove forward and tackled HFY around the waist. The ground. They rolled across the clearing, fighting for control of the knife. The war leader was stronger, but Morrison was more desperate. He had nothing left to lose. HFY got his claws around Morrison's throat and began to squeeze. Moraine could feel his air being cut off, but he managed to work his knife hand free. With the last of his strength, Warrison drove the blade up under HFY's jaw and into his brain. The war leader's grip loosened, and his yellow eyes went dark. The massive alien collapsed on top of Morrison, who lay still for several long moments, gasping for breath. When Morrison finally pushed the dead war leader off him and struggled to his feet, he found Gorthak lying motionless nearby. The old warrior had bled out from his wounds while Morrison and HFY fought their final battle. Morrison stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by the bodies of all 12 Zephyrian warriors. His back burned with pain, his throat felt crushed, and blood ran from dozens of cuts and scratches. But he was alive, and his enemies were dead. The Marine activated Kethfer's communication device and listened to the alien chatter. He could not understand the words, but he could hear the confusion and fear in the voices. Other Zephyrian units were asking for status reports from the hunting party. Soon they would come looking for their missing war leader. Morrison began walking back toward New Haven colony, following the stream he had used for water during the long hunt. Every step was agony, but he forced himself to keep moving. He had to get back and warn the colony about what was coming. As he walked, Morrison thought about his dead squadmates. Lisa Grant, Tony Martinez, and Amy Rogers had died in that first ambush, but they had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had given Morrison the motivation to turn a hopeless situation into victory. 3 hours later, a colonial patrol found Morrison collapsed beside the stream, barely a mile from the colony perimeter. As they carried him to the medical center, the Marine managed to tell them about the alien hunting party and what he had learned about its variant tactics. The story of Morrison's survival spread quickly through the human military. Within days, every Marine in the sector knew about the lone warrior who had killed 12 alien hunters with nothing but his training, his weapons, and his refusal to give up. For the Zephyrians, the loss of Kethfer's hunting party was a shock. That changed everything. Their intelligence had been wrong about humans. These weak creatures were actually the most dangerous predators they had ever encountered. The hunt was over, but the war was just beginning. And now the Zephyrians knew they were not hunting prey anymore. They were fighting for their lives against an enemy who would never stop, never surrender, and never show mercy to those who threatened human worlds. Morrison had shown them what it meant to hunt a human Marine. The lesson had cost them everything.